But Wednesday morning of the second week of Advent, this is a beautiful text by Isaiah. Let me read it to you, okay? To whom can you liken me as an equal, says the Holy One. Lift up your eyes on high and see who has created these things, calling them all by name. By his great might and the strength of his power, not one of them is missing. Why, O Jacob, do you say and declare, O Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, and my right is disregarded by my God? Do you not know, or have you not heard? The Lord is the eternal God, creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint nor grow weary, and his knowledge is beyond scrutiny. He gives strength to the fainting. For the weak he makes vigor abound. Though the young men faint and grow weary, and youths stagger and fall, they that have hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar as with eagle's wings. They'll run and not grow weary, walk and not grow faint. Boy, that's a powerful text by Isaiah. We know that. I'm glad I can read that as a Christian. I have to say that. Because as a Christian, I see that the route to holiness and perfection is by via crucis, by the way of the cross. And that's very, very different. I think about it. Well, let me read the gospel from Matthew, and he's writing to Jewish Christians. Jesus said to the crowds, "Come to me, all you who labor and are burdened, and I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Learn from me, for I'm meek and humble of heart. And you'll find rest for yourselves, for my yoke is easy, and my burden light." Well, that's a powerful text, but it takes an enormous amount of faith to believe that text, and to believe it in terms of the crucified Christ and our share in the passion of Christ. I mean that. When you read Isaiah, just flat out Isaiah, I think of all those Jews in the concentration camps who prayed. And from what I can tell, were not heard. That is, meaning they were heard by God, but were not answered. Not answered the way they wanted to be answered. They wanted to be free of the horror. Who wouldn't? Who wouldn't? I said it recently, I'm so grateful I'm a Christian. Because in the crucifixion of Christ, all evil is conquered by his share in the evil. Christ is crucified. We share in that crucifixion. And as we, to quote St. Paul, fill up those things, wanting in the suffering of Christ, we share not only in his passion, but in his redemptive suffering and hence the resurrection. We are co-redeemers with Christ through our suffering. What an enormous act of faith that is, but it's the faith that begins and ends with Christ. And we read the Old Testament in the light of Christ. But what if you have no Christ? What if you're reading Isaiah as he was read? And you go through all the horrors. As a Jewish community reads Isaiah and the horrors of the 20th century. Just that alone, not counting the whole history of the sufferings of the Jews, but especially in the 20th century, the Holocaust. 6 million Jews were murdered, or maybe 8 million, just for being Jewish. Men, women, and children. Without Christ, I would not be a believer. I could not believe in a providential deity if all there is the human narrative without the incarnation, without Christ. With Christ, I believe that we fill up with him in his sufferings, the suffering of all humanity. And in that profound sense, we share in his redemptive suffering on Calvary. We help redeem the world, leading ultimately with Christ to the resurrection and the glory. The final complete glory of humanity in Christ before the Father, through our suffering, our share in the passion. If all I had was the Old Testament promise, I don't know. I talked to a very good, very, very fine Jewish philosopher, actually, and he says, I asked him about his beliefs. And when he said, I think he was a rabbi. He said, after the Holocaust, who can believe? I remember that line. After the Holocaust, who could believe? And I can understand that. Where is the Isaiah prophecy fulfilled in the suffering of the Jews? And it's the truth. That's the truth. These are powerful texts. When I read them, I don't know how you do it, but when I read these texts, I see the challenge of belief. That God not only is the divine creator, but the divine redeemer. But I have to see that only in the suffering, death, and good of Christ. I read as it sensed the Old Testament and the Christmas mystery in the light of the divine passion on Christ on Good Friday. I read everything in the light of Good Friday. I'm not a passionist for nothing. My faith begins and ends on Good Friday, Easter Sunday, the great Paschal mystery. It's the only thing that makes life as it is, the human narrative, a divine narrative, and where goodness triumphs over evil. I mean that. If I were Jewish, I think I would suffer greatly in my faith because of the horrors, especially of the 20th century, what that Jewish rabbi said. Or if he wasn't a rabbi, a professor, a philosopher, after the Holocaust, who could believe? I can. I can. Because I believe with St. Paul, we fill up those things wanting in the suffering of Christ to the glory of God. I mean that. The only way I find any really true, profound meaning in life, a final justice, a final rightness, is in the transformative power of the cross of Christ. He redeems the world by dying on the cross, by dying a criminal. That's the truth. The church is born out of the side of Christ. The Roman soldier, after he spears Christ, believes because of the blood of Christ. The blood of humanity will either be the greatest scandal of a great scandal against the divine, or the greatest manifestation of redemption itself. When Christ dies on the cross, nobody was cheering. No one said, gee, we've just been redeemed. There is the silence of horror. It's only Easter Sunday that the full meaning of Good Friday is manifest in the glorification of Christ, and with him the fullness of life of the church. Without it, life's tough. That Jewish man has said that to me after the Holocaust, who can believe? I remember there was, this was dramatized in some film. I don't know if it was on television or what it was. I just remember the scene where the rabbis were in a concentration camp. And what they were doing, they were reading the scriptures and praying. And they essentially went off to their deaths. I think what the scene was, as they were terribly struggling, but it was the Sabbath, they went off to the Sabbath prayer. What a powerful thing. I wish I could remember the details. Yeah, anyway. Yeah, I am grateful I'm a Christian, so that I can believe in the God of creation and redemption. through the suffering of Good Friday, therefore Easter Sunday. I'm grateful. I'm grateful.